We get a complete report on the LA Kings 2025 NHL draft class from the host of Locked On NHL Prospects, Sebastian High, on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also one of the co-hosts of Locked On NHL Game Night. Right now, we're doing off-season looks at all 32 NHL teams and what they're doing to prepare for next season. I'm also a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. We are happy to welcome back to the show a recent guest. We had him on before the 2025 NHL draft to kind of preview what the LA Kings might be doing now that the draft is in the books and we know the entire draft class for the Kings. We wanted to get him back to have a look and get his opinions on how the LA Kings did. He is the host of Locked On NHL Prospects, as well as a CHL and NCAA scout and writer for Elite Prospects. He is Sebastian High. You can follow him on X Twitter at @high_Sebastian. Hello, Sebastian. How are you?
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing very well and had a nice little break after the draft because my entire year's work in terms of the scouting came to a conclusion. It was nice to step away from the work for a little bit, but I'm kind of coming back now as well for the podcast. So happy to be here and happy to chat about a very interesting draft class here for the Los Angeles Kings.
Well, we're happy to have you and looking forward to hearing your take on the LA Kings, who had 9 picks in this year's draft when it was all said and done. Their first round pick, it wasn't a surprise to any of us that Mark Giannetti, their director of amateur scouting for many years, traded back in the first round to get an extra pick. He did it a year ago. It worked out really well. But originally, the Kings were slated to take the number 24 selection. They dropped back to number 31, picked up a second round pick, which obviously we'll talk about in a minute. Now, you had projected the Kings at 24 to take forward Bill Zonin. Now, he was not around, even had the Kings kept the pick at 24. He was selected number 22 by the Penguins. I was looking for the Kings to select a defenseman because that's not something that they have a lot of in their system right now. I had my eye on Sasha Boumedian, but he also wasn't around, at least when the Kings picked at number 31. He went 28th to the Winnipeg Jets. So if the Kings were to select a defenseman in the position that they were in, who would you have selected in that spot that was available, would you say, at number 31?
I think I would have had a couple options, but I found in general that like the late first round was a weak point for defensemen. You have a pretty big glut in the second. I thought in terms of talent, if you're talking about guys like Jacob Romback, who went at 35th to Nashville, Peyton Kettles going to Pittsburgh a bit later. But I think that like Romback probably would have been my favorite, but he's a very different style of defenseman than the player that you ended up choosing here. And this player may very well have been the best right shot defenseman left on the board in this range. I think the one other maybe option you would have in terms of that would be David Bedkowski, also out of the OHL. Different style of guy, though. He's big, mean, physical, going to hurt you. Henry Brzustewicz, who the LA Kings selected at 31st overall, is not that kind of player. This is a very intelligent puck-moving defenseman who has some ability to make big mistakes and gaffes in the defensive zone, especially in breakout passing. So that's something to maybe keep an eye on in his development. But this is a player with at Elite Prospects, we compared him to Rasmus Sandin. His mobility, his intelligence for the game, his ability to kind of tinker and break down checking patterns and to get out of the defensive zone and through the neutral zone into the offensive zone is a real area of strength for Henry Brzustewicz, even if perhaps the offensive capabilities aren't like elite level of dynamism. He's still a very good progressive player in transition, and he ended up at like 39th on our board at Elite Prospects, so 31st overall. You're well within the range where that's like perfectly acceptable as a pick in our eyes, especially with a little bit of a shallower defense pool than in other areas of this draft class, like in the top half of the first, where quite a few defensemen went. So I think that he's a very interesting guy, and he could also really boom next season as he gets a massively increased role with the London Knights, who are going to be competitive as ever before, because now Oliver Bonk is graduating, and that was the big right shot defenseman ahead of him in that depth chart, and now he's going to have the reins, potentially also of the power play, and he's going to get a lot more responsibility at both ends of the ice. And I think that especially defensively, that's going to be a challenge where he's going to have to kind of grow and explore his game a little bit. But I'm very excited to see what kind of offensive sequences he's able to manufacture with added minutes and offensive zone starts and power play minutes. I think this is a guy that in hindsight could go higher than this spot in terms of like redraft rankings, because again, his spot in the lineup this season on a stacked London Knights team didn't give him the same platform as other players that maybe fell in this range of the draft.
And for Kings fans who might need a quick refresher on Henry Brzustewicz, he's a kid from Michigan, 18 years old, 6'2", 200 pounds, a right shot defenseman, as you mentioned. And the London Knights, certainly a program that is very well revered as far as developing players. And when you just look at his stats, and this is a guy I haven't watched play live. First year with London, 52 games, 2 goals, 6 points. Second year, 67 games, 10 goals, 42 points. And as you mentioned, now it's kind of a progression, it seems, for the next year to even have more responsibility. And so there's a chance for those numbers to grow even more.
Absolutely. So I think there's definitely like room for growth in terms of his projection, maybe looking a lot better a year from now or 2 years from now than we're kind of like educating our guesses now in terms of, I think like a lot of us public scouts kind of see this player as a guy that could fill a puck moving second pair role someday in the NHL if different things go the right way, a bit like Rasmus Sandin. Like there was a point as well in Sandin's career when he was in Toronto where you didn't really know, like, is this a guy who's going to end up just being an AHL tweener who can't really deal with the pace of decision making under heavy NHL forechecking pressure. And I think he's ended up being able to adapt his game really nicely with the Washington Capitals. But I think with Brzustewicz, you're going to have perhaps some similar hurdles, but this is not to say that this is a player who struggles in terms of hockey sense. He's a player that has really good vision. I think it's more just that pace under stress that's going to need some work. But again, this is an 18-year-old kid. This is an issue that he's far from the only player in this draft class to have problems like this. Like with every player outside the top 10, you're going to have pretty big areas that you're going to want to tinker with in a player's development to kind of optimize the odds of them hitting. But I think that Brzustewicz definitely has if you really, really want to like look at the numbers growing, number 3 defenseman upside. I think you could like run a second pair, maybe be like if your team's not at the highest level in terms of offensive defenseman pool, he could like fill a role on a first power play, but maybe when you're really pushing for contention, he can be a really nice and clever second power play quarterback that just can fill up the lineup when needed. So I think in terms of a late first round pick, that's a very good player to add into your organization.
And real quick for our audience who's not quite familiar with junior hockey, London Knights, I believe not only coached by, but owned by Dale Hunter, a former NHL player. Where are they kind of on the pecking order as far as juniors teams in developing NHL talent?
A very high end. Like this is, if there is one premier CHL program, a Canadian Hockey League program, which encompasses the 3 junior leagues of the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League, and the Ontario Hockey League here, it is definitely the team that has been able to most perpetually be dominant. This is the team that can attract talent like no other kind of program can in Canadian junior hockey. And it's definitely also the one with the most NHL-like arena atmosphere. Like London Knights fans go absolutely nuts. And in terms of a breeding ground for players to withstand the pressures of the NHL and that mentality to kind of face adversity when you're having a bad game, London Knights fans let you know that you're not having a good game. Like it's a tough environment up there, and it's a bit more intense than some NHL teams even. Like this is a very much a hockey city, and I think in terms of kind of building that and just perpetually being competitive, I mean, just winning the Memorial Cup, like this is a fantastic organization in terms of breeding NHL talent. And you can go back to Patrick Kane, you've had Mitch Marner, you had the list goes on. It's relatively endless of graduates from this program. So I think Henry Brzustewicz is in excellent hands and definitely ended up in a better spot than he actually was drafted to in the OHL, which was was the Ottawa 67s. And I think Team Canada fans know after the World Junior Championships that Dave Cameron is perhaps not the easiest coach in terms of working with. He was at the helm of Canada's disastrous World Juniors this past season. So I think that a lot has also gone the right way for Brzustewicz, and that might continue next season as well as he gets that massive workload increase.
And the LA Kings have another defensive prospect playing in London as well, in Jared Woolley. We saw he and Brzustewicz playing together in development camp, which I'm sure they had a lot of fun with as well. We're just getting started. I'm checking the picks from the Los Angeles Kings in this past year's draft. We will continue with Sebastian High here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? FanDuel tracks your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether it's a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you're a part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we are continuing with Sebastian High, looking at the LA Kings full draft class from 2025, and we will get into the second round, a pick that the Kings obviously were able to acquire thanks to moving back in the first round. It was the number 59 overall pick, and they went with a forward out of Czechia. His name is Voytech Hradec, 18 years old, 6 foot, 175, a left shot, left winger who will be playing in Czechia again this coming season. Sebastian, what can you tell us about this player?
Yeah, so Chihar is a player that we had a bit lower in terms of our rankings at Elite Prospects, but that's not to take away about the qualities that he brings. I think he's a very easy player to see what he does really well on the ice when you watch him. It doesn't take many viewings to kind of figure out how he ticks. This is a really relentless player. He's mainly played on the wing this season, played an entire year at the professional level. So he's a 6 foot, 175-pound left shot winger. And he was one of the only players, if not the only one, to play the entire season this year in the Czech Pro League. Everyone else was kind of bobbling between the junior and the pro level. There's no other draft eligible that played the whole season there. It's not an easy league to kind of stick in. And two of the other names in there went as like either top 10 or top 35 picks, with Radim Mrtka and Max Psnitska, both guys that then ended up going over to the WHL and Canadian juniors midway through the seasons to prove their worth there, and their draft stocks really rose as a result of those moves. But Chihar stayed in Europe, and he didn't produce all that much. I mean, 4 goals, 9 points in 43 games is relatively pedestrian on the surface, but he's a very intense player who plays with real speed. He's a very good skater. He's a tenacious guy who goes to the net. He creates turnovers. The upside might not be the highest in the world in terms of what he can create out of nothing, in terms of his passing, his vision, his handling ability. But this is a guy that plays the game in a very direct way, in the sense that, I mean, look, as somebody who has grown up in Montreal, I'm very familiar with Marc Bergevin and what he likes in players. This is a guy in the Marc Bergevin mold. He plays hard, he plays direct, he goes to the net, and he's going to grind out battles for you. So in terms of a guy that in that second round range, if Los Angeles is like pretty confident they can get this guy to just be a difficult bottom 6 player to play against, who can play up the lineup if you need him to, I see total value in that. But at Elite Prospects, we thought other players had similar qualities that maybe did it a bit better. So we had him ranked at 113th. But again, later on in the draft class, also bigger divergences in terms of where we slot players.
All right. In the third round, the Kings had the 88th overall pick. They went with forward Christian Epperson from the U.S. I believe he's out of Wisconsin. 19-year-old, 6 foot, 185, left shot, left winger. 58 games with the Saginaw Spirit, 27 goals and 80 points, and he is headed to the University of Denver, one of 3 Kings draft picks that will be playing for the Pioneers this coming season.
It's an excellent program to have prospects in, let me tell you that. I mean, I definitely would want to have more prospects for my team with Denver. And Christian Epperson's a fascinating case study. We really loved him at Elite Prospects. And this is also, by the way, the first of 4 players that the Kings selected of the 9 in total who are actually re-entries, who were actually eligible for previous drafts before this one, but went not selected. So Los Angeles was definitely not afraid to kind of take those swings this year on guys that are a bit older, but have also had a bit more time to then show the Kings what they can do really well. And Epperson was, he absolutely exploded this season. So last year when he went undrafted, it was because he was kind of buried down a depth chart with the NTDP, with the US program there. So there in the USHL last year, he got into 32 games, scoring 4 goals and 11 points and 40 penalty minutes. So like that's your typical kind of bottom 6 checking kind of stat line. And then he transfers over to the Saginaw Spirit in the Ontario Hockey League, pairing up with noted star junior player Michael Misa, who led the entire CHL in scoring this season. And who was a player that really elevated him all year long? Christian Epperson. So he ended up scoring 27 goals and 53 assists for 80 points in 58 games. And he's a pretty average build as a player, but he's also a workhorse who gets to the middle of the ice. So 6 feet tall, 185 pounds as a left shot winger. I think he's a player that just gets the puck to dangerous areas very consistently, very effectively. And in terms of players within the LA Kings organization that he can mold his game after really nicely, Trevor Moore really comes to mind. I think this is a player that could really emulate a lot of that. There have been some whispers of like some character difficulties in terms of working with him, and he has bounced between different programs quite a bit in recent years. But again, they're young kids, and if Los Angeles is confident they're able to work with him to progress his career, and Denver again is a great program, I think that this is going to turn out very nicely, and is probably my favorite selection that Los Angeles made in this draft class.
All right, with the first of 2 picks in round number 4, 120th overall, the Kings selected defenseman Caden Harrington out of Vermont, 19 years old, so another 19-year-old, 6'2", 205 right shot defenseman, 2 years in the USHL, which you cover. He'll be attending the University of Vermont this coming season.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of Caden Harrington, and he's a very interesting player. So as you mentioned, the build is pretty solid, and he's a player that the thing I admire about him, and the thing that I think like convinces me of his value, and in this range, maybe even like 10, 15 slots higher than this potentially, is last season in his draft eligible campaign, the big knock on him was his physicality, his kind of hard-nosed defending. This year, that became a very clear strength in his game. So that ability to kind of hone in on the things he has to improve on, and not just like tinker with it, but to just overload it in an off season and to change the way he played the game. That is really cool to see. And it made him one of the more dominant defensemen in the US Hockey League this season, both in terms of scoring. I mean, 16 goals, 16 assists in 53 games. That's a cool stat line for a defenseman. Like, this guy gets pucks into the net. He's got a really good shot, and he has good shooting habits in terms of like delaying his release, veiling his shot, curling at the last minute around an outstretched stick. He can do these different things to adapt to what's thrown at him. Like, he's still going to have to work on his skating ability. But the fact that he was the #1 guy on the most structured defense in the league this season in the USHL with the Lincoln Stars, I think that bodes pretty well about his ability to kind of slot into a lineup and fill a role and find a way to be as effective as he can. So I wouldn't bet against him at least like making it to like a 7th defenseman role where he can chip in when you need him to, but he could definitely also end up higher than that in the lineup. Like, I think maybe a #5 defenseman who can kind of run your second pair and kind of be able to do a bit of everything quite well, depending on what you ask him to do. He can focus on different areas. He's never going to be outstanding at everything at the same time, but I think he could be really, really good at a selection of things that you deploy him to do specifically, and that can adapt on a game-to-game, week-to-week basis more than other players I've watched in this draft class, which is, I think, a pretty fun aspect for a player to have, especially at this young of an age.
And with the second pick in the 4th round, just 5 picks later at 125, the Kings go with forward Jimmy Lombardi out of Canada, 18-year-old, 6 foot 175, left shot centerman, 2 years with the Flint Firebirds, and will be attending the University of Michigan this coming season.
Yeah, another very skilled player on this one with real play driving potential. Another guy where skating you're going to have to work on. So clearly the Kings are confident in their ability to develop the skating side of the game with these selections, picking guys that have some runway to improve the skating. They need to bring that to another gear in order to kind of keep up with the NHL pace. But we are kind of banking on the selection of other tools in his game. And with Jimmy Lombardi as a 6-foot, 175-pound left shot forward who played most of the season at center as well. This is a guy with excellent handling abilities, able to draw players in. This is a guy that I have this one of my favorite terms in terms of scouting is gravitational effect that players can have, and in terms of just pulling defenders into their orbits, kind of sucking players towards them, giving their teammates way more room to operate in than a coach would want to see on the ice. And Lombardi's one of those players that can just kind of do that intuitively and has that skill to draw guys in, and he has the pace of intelligence to keep up with those hands. So the feet still have to catch up, but he's got a lot of these elements that I think are really good. But again, the physicality I think could also use some progression in the weight room. But yeah, I think for a guy in like this later end of the draft, where you're never going to get a slam dunk in this range in terms of a clear finished product, I think that Lombardi's a really fun guy with middle six potential, who can really handle a puck and get fans out of their seats. So that's a fun pick.
All right, 5 picks down, 4 to go with Sebastian High from Locked On NHL Prospects. With that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. All right, continuing with Sebastian High, 5th round, 152nd overall. And I thought if there was one position the Kings probably wouldn't draft, it was goaltender. I was wrong. They took Petteri Ripenan out of Finland, 19-year-old, 6 foot 175, be playing in Finland again next season. So the Kings now have, as drafted players, all 3 starting goalies from last year's World Junior Championships for the U.S., Canada, and Finland now with Petteri Ripenan. Of course, we're also talking about Carter George for Canada and Hampton Slakinski for the U.S. What were your thoughts on not only picking this player, but picking another goaltender, considering the Kings seem to be pretty rich in young goaltending?
If the value's there, go for it. I mean, with drafting, the goal is to add value to your organization. It doesn't have to be players where everyone's going to fit into your lineup. You're always going to have more draft picks than you're going to have contract slots. So I think in terms of taking a swing where you see value in, that's a great way to go. And for me, this is a fantastic selection. I do this practice every single draft where when my hometown Montreal Canadiens are on the clock, I make a selection based off of my own scouting in the season. And Petteri Ripenan is a player that I selected before this slot in terms of a goaltender I thought that was undervalued in this class relative to others, maybe because he's undersized and an overager. I mean, 6 feet tall, 176 pounds. That is very small by goaltending standards, where you're kind of typically aiming for 6'3" and above. But I think that there's a lot of value kind of in these undersized goaltenders, especially in recent years. You don't have to look much further than guys like Dustin Wolf to see a pattern emerging that some very skilled guys can fall when they are a bit smaller. But with Petteri Ripenan, I think like so much of the hockey world saw at the World Junior Championships just how special he can be in spurts. He went 7-0 for Finland, 9-3-3. He went 5-2, my bad, but he started all 7 games for Finland and 933 save percentage. That is nuts at a World Junior Championship where you're facing the best players in your age group and you're an undrafted netminder at this stage, once undrafted. And he was just phenomenal. He was potentially an MVP at that tournament in my eyes. Like, he stole games that Finland didn't deserve to be in on certain occasions. And what's even more impressive is what he was able to do as a first-time starting goaltender in professional hockey this campaign with Kiekko Espoo. And it wasn't the best team in the world. Like, he had a 16-9-14 record, but a 912 save percentage on 48 games played as a rookie starting netminder in the top professional tier in Finland, which is a top 5 league in the world, or top 6 if you're stretching it. That is impressive stuff. And I think that this is a resume for a goaltender that as I said, would have been very confident taking a swing on in the mid-late rounds of this draft class. And even though it's an area of strength in the Kings pool, I think that this is a smart gamble to take on.
Sixth round, 184th overall, the Kings selected forward Jan Hovan from Slovakia, 18-year-old, 6'2", 185 left shot centerman. Coming over to North America this year, going to be playing for the Sudbury Wolves in the OHL.
Yeah, it was a weak, relatively weak draft class coming out of Finland as a whole this year in terms of players playing in Finland, which does include Jan Hovan. And he was probably the one that our scouting staff watched the most of this season among those Finland-based draft-eligible talents. And he's a guy that, as you mentioned, has a really solid frame. He's a pretty well-built player already, and he's just a very supportive guy at both ends of the ice. You're always going to be glad to have him on your side if you're a center. He does a lot of that gritty work that takes a bit of weight off of the center's shoulders. He's really efficient on the forecheck. He gets involved. He lays hits. I think that there's perhaps a limitation in terms of the offensive upside, but still, he's a big-bodied guy who plays that physical side. I don't think he has any like individual tool, like if we're talking about puck skills, like the handling or the shot or the passing or the skating, even if you want to like add that into it, that are like above average in terms of projection. But he just is a competitor. So in terms of a player that could fill a role in a fourth line, and when you're selecting in the last couple rounds of the draft, if you're getting an NHL player, it's easily a hit. Like you're definitely batting like well if you're getting a hit in the late rounds like this, where your likelihood's probably around the 10% range, maybe 15 or 16, to get a player that plays above like 200 NHL games. And I think that Hovan could really establish a career as a checker on a fourth line. So if you're able to get that down the road, and I think that's really solid. And he's actually rumored to go significantly higher than this in the draft class. So that's always a nice thing as well when you're able to get a player low in the ranking, low in the draft order, that was probably likely to go a bit higher than where you selected.
Kings had 2 7th rounders, and for whatever reason, it seems, and I haven't done this for every team in the league, the Kings have done pretty well with 7th rounders. Now they got James Reeder, who's at the University of Denver in last year's draft. They really like him a lot. The last 3 picks they had before that, Andre Lee in 2019, Atu Yemsen in 2020, and Caleb Lawrence in 2022, are all signed and playing in the AHL for the Ontario Reign. And then before that, you look at guys like Matt Roy in 2015, a 7th rounder, Jake Middleton in 2014, a 7th rounder, in 2009, Nick Dowd, a 7th rounder. Those guys are all still playing in the NHL right now. So pretty good recent history for whatever reason in the 7th round for the LA Kings.
I always feel like the 7th round is the one where you get the most insight into what a scouting staff really values, because this is the area where you basically have a pool of like 1,000 players. I mean, like at the beginning of a season, when you're actually at the draft table, you're probably looking at maybe like 20 guys at this stage in the late rounds that you still have kind of an eye on. And I think that this is really the part of the draft where like scouts are able to show what they want to take those swings on, when they just swing as hard as they can and go for it. And I think that Brendan McMurro, who's the first of these 7th round selections, is a real kind of exemplified version of that. This is a player who launches himself around the ice. He's a really, really hard competitor, very direct style of play. And he's a guy that a lot of scouts, and myself included, really liked last year when he was the first time draft eligible. He's another re-entry here that Los Angeles selected, where he's playing with the NTDP, and he scored quite well. I mean, like 16 points in 27 USHL games in limited minutes is nothing to scoff at. And then this year, he was an integral part of a Waterloo Blackhawks team that made it all the way to the finals, and it ended up losing there to the Muskegon Lumberjacks. And again, like McMurro, with his direct play, scoring rate from within like 6 feet of the crease, had 24 goals in the season, 42 points in 58 games. He's a player I really respect, and he's a guy that I think is going to easily find himself a very useful role for the University of Denver, who can play up and down the lineup. Maybe in his first rookie season is going to be that like 4th or 3rd line, intense, direct, fast checking guy. But then maybe in the years following that can take more and more offensive responsibility. But in terms of like playoff, like fire in them, there were a few players with more of a flame lit under their butts in the playoffs of the USHL this year than Brendan McMurro. So I think he's a good fit for what Los Angeles is prioritizing in the players they're selecting here.
And the final selection, the second pick in the 7th round, 216th overall, it's defenseman Will Sharp out of Canada, 18-year-old, 6'1", 195, a left shot defenseman, 3 years in the Western Hockey League, and will be with the Kelowna Rockets again this season.
Yeah, so he's another player I think could actually really benefit from a situation there in Kelowna. So he was traded this year halfway through the season. The Kelowna Rockets this year did a bit of a fire sale, but only half of one. So they sold off guys like Andrew Crystal, for instance, and Sharp was definitely a part of this grand exit coming in halfway through the season. But the Kelowna Rockets are hosting the Memorial Cup this coming campaign, and that means that they have a free entry into the biggest tournament in Canadian junior hockey for next season. So Will Sharp is going to be an important piece of a team that's going to make a really, really big push to get significantly better in the coming 6 months. This is a team that will be loading up, and Sharp can kind of do a bit of everything. So he's a guy with decent mobility. I think that maybe the explosiveness in his skating definitely still needs some tinkering, but kind of that edge work agility, very, very good with this player. He can really hit a great pass in transition, a good first pass. In terms of NHL projection, talking more about a guy that could make it work as a facilitator on a bottom pair. But in terms of next year in junior hockey, he could really see a big bump on the scoring he had this year, which, I mean, was still nothing to kind of make fun of. Like, he had over 40 points this campaign, split between 2 teams, and that's pretty good scoring. And I think that next year is going to one-up that as well.
That is Sebastian High, host of Locked On NHL Prospects, as well as the USHL and NCAA scout and writer for Elite Prospects. You can follow him on X, Twitter at @High_Sebastian. Sebastian, loved all the insight. Really appreciate your time. Great job giving us some information on a lot of these players that the Kings drafted, and looking forward to connecting with you again next year around draft time, which I know is going to be very exciting. A lot of people excited about next year's draft with a lot of potential big players being selected, but really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it so much, Eddie. And yeah, thanks again. And I really enjoyed the breakdown of the Kings draft. Here was a particularly interesting class, I think, for them this year.
All right. We appreciate your time. Thanks, Sebastian.
Cheers.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Always good to get more information on the Kings draft picks and some good information there. That will do it for today's show for you everydayers. Those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day. Of course, coming up on Friday, don't forget we have our fan feedback show. Anything that's on your mind, send us an email. Get your thoughts heard. LockedOnEddie@gmail.com, the email address, EDDIE. If you're watching on YouTube, you can always post your comments in the comment section. And we'd love you to stay connected with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.